Every time I make a map, I get asked the same question, which is really, how do I actually make my files? Or how do I make my files on my iPad, which then translates to a laser cutting file, which then I'm able to like actually build. So I want to try to address that question in this video. Where I really start with like every one of these map builds is really on my iPad first. The app I use within the iPad is called Sketchbook. I'm much better at my drawings doing them on my iPad rather than actually trying to do them in a computer. I feel it's way more natural to actually just use the Apple Pencil than it is to try to use a mouse to create a map file. Where I start on almost every single map is just on a Google search, looking for a map concept that I like. I try to stay pretty true to what the game map was or what the show map was in the case of like Avatar. I really try to find a map that's pretty true to that and that doesn't have too many artifacts in it. Something that's easily drawable and easily translatable to a laser file. When I get a map into my iPad, I will actually start to finally think about, how do I really want this map to be laid out? I know I always want to make the water layer be made out of resin, so I have to start to think of, how is the resin going to pool inside of the land masses? What's going to go on top of the land masses? Is there going to be multiple layers to them? And then how am I going to do a frame? So I have to think about all of that before I start actually creating each individual layer. So I start to lay out each individual piece within each individual layer in the iPad. I'll start from the most detailed layer and work my way through it all until I have the entire thing drawn out. Once that's all done, I will export the file from the iPad and put it into my Google Drive. The iPad app actually also lets me time-lapse how I'm drawing it. So a lot of times in the video I'll have a quick snippet of me actually tracing out the outline. That's actually all done within the app as well. The first thing I do when I get it on my computer is I load it into a software called GIMP, which is a Photoshop alternative because I'm cheap. When I actually download the file from my Google Drive, it comes in with the same layers that were in the iPad, which is really nice. I can see everything in its specific colors that I drew it out in the iPad. That Photoshop alternative will allow me to just select all of each individual layer and bring it to Inkscape. There's probably an easier way to drag and drop the file from my iPad straight into Illustrator, but I found it comes in at the right size that I want if I just do the middle position of going to GIMP first. If you have a better way of making files than this, please leave it in the comments below. This is the way that works for us. When I'm in GIMP, like I said, I will actually just hover over the layer that I want to be on, select all, copy, then I will go over to Inkscape and paste it in. I'll keep everything that I paste into Inkscape exactly the same size that it came in from GIMP so I can start working on alignment issues. That's one of the bigger issues that we have along the whole way with maps, is that everything has to be completely aligned properly. So if we bring it all in together at the same time, then we can scale it all down at the same amount. And it looks like a hodgepodge of layers right now because I didn't select the same area that I was at, but what you can do is just select all of the pieces that you imported and align them all together. Okay, once I align everything center, now I have exactly the file that I had in my iPad, but brought into Illustrator. This is still not a vector file. I can zoom in this and we'll see a million pixels. So what I need to do now is select each individual piece and trace to bitmap. Tracing the bitmap will create it into a vector file, which can be scaled any which way. I can make a map that's this big, or I can make a map that's this big, and it will be translatable to the laser. What I'll do is I will select one of the sections and I'll go to Path, Trace Bitmap, do a live preview so I can see what I'm doing. I'll bring the brightness all the way up until I start to see my artifacts on the screen. And when I hit OK, now there's all the words completely in vector form now. After a bit of futzing with a file to get it organized into my 4 layers, where I like to end up is in a file like this, where it has all 4 individual layers laid out on a Glowforge based template because I have a Glowforge laser cutter. I want it to be something that I can visually see exactly what my bed will see, as well as I like to actually see each individual layer of the project. So in reference here, we have the back panel all the way to the left, and the frame veneer all the way to the right. Each individual layer has their own little artifacts that are on top of them. So like the second layer has the frame for the resin to be in, as well as all the land masses in it with the engraving on the land masses. The acrylic panel is put on my screen in reverse because we've found that engraving acrylic panels backwards actually has a much clearer finish on it when it's done. It looks a lot nicer. It's a lot cleaner to actually have a complete glass surface on here rather than having an engraved surface. We can actually also light it up since it's an edge-lit piece of acrylic. So it gives it a lot of different properties if we do it this way. Now from there, I save it to our file location, and then I will go into the Glowforge app. For those of you that don't have a Glowforge, this is going to be a little bit Glowforge specific, so feel free to just jump ahead a little bit. But this is how we send our files to the laser and really how it's set up inside of the Glowforge app. So what I will typically try to do is work from the bottom up because that's how I'm going to be creating it. So I'll start by scooching over everything from the print bed area and moving over just my back panel. And that is typically printed out of MDF, mainly because of the fact that it's cheap, it's not seen, it doesn't need to be anything fancy, so medium density fiberboard or the proof grade draft board, that works perfectly. I primarily use 1/8 inch thick material because I don't want it to get too chunky. This is already 3 layers of 1/8 inch and a layer of veneer. It's not too bad, I just don't want it to get much thicker than this. So I'll cut out the medium draft board and then I will cut out the land masses and frame out of whatever color wood I want it to be out of. In the case of the Tamriel map, it was done out of cherry wood. That is the proof grade cherry plywood from Glowforge. When I have both of those and I have the land masses engraved, I'll then be able to take it over to the workbench and fill it with resin, start hand painting, and while I'm doing that, I'll start cutting the acrylic panel and the top frame. One tip I have for the proof grade veneer, or any veneer for that matter, I wouldn't mask it if you don't have to. I found that the engrave isn't as deep, so I have to engrave it again, which can then tear the veneer since it's so thin. So I highly recommend if you're going to be engraving on veneers that you don't mask them, you just clean them after they're done engraving. It's going to save you a lot of time, and it's going to save you from having potentially little holes in your engrave because it engraved too deep. And now that that's all done, let's go make it.